Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast presented by Zwift. We had the big announcement on our Twitter yesterday. We're really, really excited about it. More on that later in our first group ride next Tuesday, the 8th of February. But I'm here with Benji, as always, for our first race recap of the season, Volta a la Comunitat Valenciana Stage 1. We'll also talk about Saudi Tour and Bessèges briefly at the end. Can't believe the season's already here, Benji. And already, like, chock-a-block with racing throughout February. It's almost daily.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And we've had 2 years where February was a bit changed and adapted. And this year we've got a more normal start to the season, in my opinion. And we've got the normal Algarve and we've got the normal Valenciana and Andalusian all coming up. And I'm so hyped about the start of the season. We are seeing the biggest guns already riding in February. And we're going to be here, right here to report on it. And I'm looking forward to doing so for today as well.
Yeah, I can't believe it's already here. We're G'd up, and we can't wait to bring you even more coverage this year, including races. You're thinking, this isn't a World Tour race. You're right. Valenciana's not. We have a different plan this year. If there are good teams, good riders at these races, we will be covering it. And Valenciana has Evenepoel with his season debut for Quick Step alongside Jakobsen and Lampard and Catania. Movistar have Mars and Bala. Ayuso starting for UAE, as well as the Shark at Astana and Rodriguez at Ineos. I'm sure I've missed some riders there. Vlasov season debut for Bora. Oh no, he's at Mallorca, but first time we'll actually see him live. So yeah, Valencia's stacked field with GC riders and a few sprinters, a few and far between. The first stage, 167 Ks. It had a 10K 4.2% climb in the middle after a 3K 9.5%. It's a hard race down in Valencia, usually not one for sprinters. Then the finale was 40 Ks of two climbs, neither of which were particularly outrageous. 4K is 5.4%, then a short descent, then a 4.6K 7% climb, the Torralba del Pinar, and then like a rolling plateau at the end of 4Ks, 3.5Ks or so after that climb. So not expecting huge GC gaps, not outrageous climbs. But when did you tune in, Benji? Was there a breakaway, or who was taking upon themselves to control today's stage?
I basically started watching when we initially had the intermediate sprint, which happened with roughly, was it 25 kilometers to go just before the Ayodar climb? And that intermediate sprint was run in by Mohoric and Vlasov sprinting against each other. Vlasov took some GC seconds there, so that's pretty important, I guess. He obviously wasn't the most best sprinter in the world, but he's taking seconds there. So for GC, that can matter if it's a close call. But might it be a close call? I guess we would find out on the climbs afterwards, those two climbs you just mentioned. Ayodar being the first one, not a long climb either, but we saw some teams trying to set things up or prepare for the action. We saw a crash very early on the climb. Marc Soler down, Molano and Nance Peters. They seem to be relatively all right, it seems. So I'm guessing they went on their bike again and started riding again. And then eventually we saw Quickstep moving to the front. Quickstep Alpha Vinyl with Remco Evenepoel and Honoré as potential leaders at the start of this day. Because if it's a very attacking stage, we might see Remco being more prevalent on the stage than a Honoré who might have trouble with the climbing if the tempo is very high. So we had the two options in the camp of Quickstep there, and Lampard was doing the God's work on that climb. He moved to the front, started pacing at a tempo that was hard enough to make sure that there's no second tier or third tier people trying to get away, and it's not hard to make sure that Evenepoel is comfortable in the wheel and so forth. And towards the end of that climb, we saw Honoré moving up as well and sitting nicely at the front as well. And that was, I think, to keep Remco safe in the descent, right?
Exactly. That meant they were first in the descent. And I think Juan Ayuso, the young star in UAE, got caught up in that crash with Peters. I was keen to see how he'd go mixing it up at the end of this stage, but we were denied that opportunity. Hope all of those guys are okay. And it's always interesting with these sort of climbs on the first stage where it's not so hard that the group is going to be whittled down to 3-5 guys, and these teams don't have 8 Tour de France level sort of domestiques here either, and there's often power vacuums or teams doing odd things, and that's what we had here with Bahrain taking over from Quickstep, because Quickstep really didn't have that many. They don't have that many climbers here to pace this for Evenepoel. And Bahrain took over, and I was thinking, who are they riding for here? I was like, is Croatia race Steven Williams? Like, is he on? And we just don't know because there's no Lander here, which is kind of surprising. And they have Lewis Leon. He's not the best climber. He's like a break guy. Dylan Turns, I think, needs a longer climb from a break. And Mohoric would like a steadier tempo for a sprint. But they had Bilbao, Tratnik, and Turns and Lewis, Turns absolutely drilling it, and it dropped Mohoric. And so they were left with just Lewis Leon, I think, and Turns sitting there being like, oh, well, what was the point of that? So that was, am I missing something, Benji? And Tratnik as well? Like, do you know why they might have done that?
Well, at first I would expect that. We don't 100% know which form each rider is in, so we don't know if Bilbao is in such a mediocre form that is the reason that he's the first one to ride of those five, because that was somewhat surprising when I saw it. Bilbao doing the pacing as one of the first riders. You'd say that that's a potential GC rider if he's in form, but apparently not, because he was the first of the five riders. Tratnik, Domestique, we know that he's not going to be winning the stage. And Mohoric was kind of doing weird stuff, because first he was in second wheel, then in third wheel when Tratnik came past him, and then we saw Turns also pass Mohoric. So Mohoric was moving back, and I was like, are they now working for Mohoric? But they're kind of playing with it so that it's not obvious that they're working for Mohoric. And then suddenly, like you mentioned, he was kind of gone. And we saw that they were pacing quite hard, even for Luis Leon Sanchez to be able to follow. So I think whatever they were doing it too fast or too hard, because they were bringing themselves into trouble. And let's be honest, with that squad, should you be the one pacing on a climb like this? Because you've got quite a few good riders in there, in that group. You've got the likes of an Evenepoel still with Mohonore still in that group as well. You've got Vlasov, who's also in that group, and so forth. So yeah, I don't think they should have been pacing that much.
It reminded me a lot of the Picon Blanco Vuelta stage, where they just decided, let's just drive Picon Blanco as hard as we can, even though it dropped Haig, even though Landa wasn't going to do anything. And they seemed, I don't know, maybe the DS tell them. It didn't make sense to me. And you got to remember, a lot of Bahrain's wins last year were not to do with teamwork. They were just dominance from the particular rider in either break or solo move. Yeah. Anyway, that it all suited Remco though.
Yeah. What if instead of like pacing, they decided to roll attacks with those five riders, knowing that they were the team with the most riders? Because if you do that with Luis Leon Sanchez, with even a Mohoric, with a Turns, then at some point somebody's going to get a gap, and people are going to get to watching each other. But I think that Movistar would have put a foot in the door there, because you've had Mühlberger still in that group, also with Mas and Valverde. And to be honest, on a parkour like this, where the plateau section is after the climb, Valverde could have a bit of a kick sprint right there. So I was thinking perhaps they're going to keep it together. They're going to try and not pace too hard right here and make sure Valverde gets over the climb so they can have a little bit of a sprint in a reduced group. But then eventually Mühlberger started pacing a decent tempo, yes, until he started going by the side, and Mas took over and he just obliterated the group. So I was like, Valverde, he can't follow you, mate. What's the plan?
It was classic Mas, and you're right. I think Bahrain, if they'd rolled the tax, there was Mühlberger who he's back. He looked better. He sort of didn't ride that much last year for Movistar. He would have maybe closed that down, but Movistar, I was like, shouldn't you want to keep it like all the quick men are getting dropped? Just drive it. So Honoré was gone. Honoré was sort of the last guy you thought, okay, he's a bit fast. And I'll be honest, Ben, I kind of think Mas sold Bauer here. And this is why Miguel Angel Lopez, the big guy, like if he was here to pull or whatever, it makes a big difference. But yeah, Mas pulls and then stops. And then that has helped Evenepoel, because the last 5 or 7 minutes of this climb has been very hard. Evenepoel's had no domestiques to make it relatively hard for him. And now there's a power vacuum just before the end of the climb finishes, when there's a thin group and no one has any domestiques anymore. It's like, it's just been set up for him perfectly. And into that power vacuum attacks Antoine Tolhoek, who's just been signed by Trek, from Jumbo Visma. Ineos had Carlos Rodriguez and I think Sivakov in the group. Rodriguez looked the best of them. Gegenhardt, I think, was caught behind. And like, I don't know, Benji. Maybe Musk just tried to get away. Sometimes it's hard to know because like he attacks at 500 watts, or 400 watts, so you don't know what he's doing. But yeah, it seemed to be set up perfectly for Evenepoel, and that's when he did the business.
Yeah, quite certainly. We also saw that Fulsang was also making a bit of a move trying to close down that Tolhoek attack you mentioned. And honestly, I was like, okay, if nobody behind takes over, then these two riders might just magically do something here. But obviously that Remco didn't want that to happen. But Rodriguez was the one that closed it down for Remco. Remco was in his wheel. And I was like, okay, you can do it for me. And then eventually, once they caught Tolhoek and so forth, again, the tempo stops completely. And that's when you know an attack is coming, and Remco was the one doing it. And let's be honest, it took about 3 seconds for a gap of 50 meters to occur. And I was like, okay, he wins. Like, did you feel like anybody had a chance when you saw the gap?
That's the thing. Like it was good timing from him. Like he didn't. I thought, and maybe earlier he would have in his career. I thought when maybe Mühlberger had just finished and Mars had just finished, I thought he'd attack then, and maybe Valverde close. He actually waited a little bit for a couple of attacks to go, the Tolhoek one, and then they had a gap, no domestiques there. Tolhoek's not going to close him down. Slash was done, and he didn't get out of the saddle. Just continued riding his pace. It was great timing, and as Benji said, it was the lack of reaction behind. The race was done. Vlasov eventually reacted, and sometimes he's hurt himself by overreacting on GC. Today, it actually didn't hurt him too much, chasing on his own, particularly when in the group behind, we didn't see it at all, was probably, I'm guessing, Valverde and Mas in that group of 5 or 7, and no one pacing. So those two looking at each other. Maybe I'm wrong. But Remco's gone. The climb finishes, and then it's like a rolling little up and down descent ridge section where aero does matter, and they're going high speeds. And once he had a gap of 15 seconds, curtains for everybody. And just, it was set up perfectly for him. Classic win for Evenepoel. Goes to the line and wins by 16 seconds ahead of Alexander Vlasov. Nice result for him. 31 seconds ahead of Rodriguez. Rodriguez looking good in third. Then Mas, Sanchez, Tolhoek, Valverde, Fulsang, and then Mohoric was Group 3 with Dela Cruz and Honoré, etc. So nothing more to say, Benji. Remco Mania begins. How should we rate this result? I haven't actually seen the climbing speeds, but yeah, it couldn't have started better.
I think it's a great start to the season. Now, obviously, it's February, so not everybody is in the best form of their year already. We saw it in some other races today that some riders are not as great in February as they are in their Grand Tours. But in all honesty, like we've seen in previous years, that Evenepoel can do this for a longer period of time. And yes, when he starts off the season with victories like this, it's going to motivate him a lot to keep this going. And not only in Valenciana, but Algarve coming up and so forth, and aiming for his first, he's riding Tirreno, right? So perfect parkour to try the same stuff as well. So I'm so fascinated that he's in top form because he brightens up races. He's entertaining to watch, and I like that he was able to perform this today. Now, I do want to add that I think that Ayuso was not the one that crashed for UAE because he ended up being 13th on a minute 4. And if he was the one crashing, then that's a very good performance.
Yeah, wow.
So I think it was Soler.
Okay, my bad. Sorry. I'm still not used to the new kits, the new rider, the new transfer. A little bit rusty. Let me shake it out. Come on, it's only February, so at least it's preseason for us too. I want to talk about Remco's schedule in a second, Benji. Before I do, mention our show partner, Zwift. If you don't know, Zwift is the indoor cycling app that makes training fun with 9 different worlds based on real life and fantasy locations, including Innsbruck and Richmond worlds. Tons of workouts and training programs, and a huge community to keep you company whilst you ride. In fact, the weather here in Andorra is like, it's actually mental. There was an earthquake, a 4 magnitude, and people like 4 magnitude earthquake. That's not even that bad. It woke us up at 3 a.m. Dog went crazy. And then the next day, 100 km/h winds, but it was warm. It was like 12 degrees. You look out like, I'll go for a ride. No, 100 km/h winds. I ain't crashing again this year. That's my New Year's resolution. So the Zwift has been really useful for me in the off season. Benji and I got big plans with our personal fitness goals with Zwift. But next week on Tuesday, we have our first ever LRCP Zwift group ride. It'll be after Valenciana's finished. So it's going to be a Q&A ride, basically. We have a Discord set up where Benji and I will be on audio. You can ask questions in Discord via text, and yeah, we'll answer those questions. It'll be a 60-minute social spin, all fitness levels welcome. And it's our first one, so we'd really appreciate if you have Zwift or want to join Zwift, joining us on that group ride. The link to the event is down below. You said Tirreno, Remco, for Remco, Benji. I'm saying Tour.
Yes. Tour de France.
Yep, just do it.
I don't think he's going.
He's not.
I don't know. But to be honest, it's probably not the most stressful race to go to, because the Giro is usually the one where you've got the shady descents and so forth. The Tour doesn't really have that many shady descents that happen. So it's Tour of Volta when it comes to parkour, and I think they're sending him to the Volta to make it less stressful in Belgian media. I think that's the reason they're doing that. And Alaphilippe.
I'm not saying it's the right thing to do to send him to the Tour.
Yeah.
I'm just saying a couple more .pro stage wins and a .pro GC win, and Lefebvre is just going to go, fuck it, send him to the Tour de France. Seriously, I mean, I'm also a lunatic, so for my personal, I want him there.
To be honest, and if you put him behind Merckx, he might start winning sprint stages, so you never know.
Never forget the Bernal Remco sprint in the Giro. But yeah, it's great. It's great to see him back. Polarizing figure. Love him or hate him, seems to be a polarizing figure. Good to see him back. Vlasov, he's been quite good on these punchy climbs, Benji, in Mallorca, which wasn't live, but he was good there. He's won Emilia in 2020. He's looking pretty good. But tomorrow's stage in Volta la Comunitat Valenciana, 172 Ks. It's a fit sprinters stage. There's a lot of low gradient climbs. It's from Batera to Torrent. The last climb's 4Ks, 3%, about 15 Ks from the finish. There's a collection of 4K, 4 to 5% climbs in the middle of the stage, but really a sprinter in good condition, the likes of which, Christoph, who is here, should be making it over. What do you think Jakobsen will get around? He should.
I think Fabio Jakobsen wins the sprint, and I think it's honestly also a good team surrounding him to set tempo throughout the stage to make sure there's not a break winning, for example. When it comes to a lead out for Jakobsen, we've got the man himself here, right? Mikkel Merku.
Wow.
And
they've
as
not
a
even
consequence,
brought a GC team. They've brought a sprint team.
And Lampard in that train, put in Honoré perhaps as well at some point. Cheney to be one of the faster riders as well to keep up the tempo in the sprint train. So you've got a sprint train that can deliver Jakobsen to the victory. And we know that people that are in the wheel of Merku win. So he's going to do that.
Other fast men, one of which who we recently interviewed on Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast, who doesn't mind a hill, Matthew Walls on Bora Hansgrohe. Watch out for him. Ineos have Viviani. He'll probably be led out by Freyler and Swift. Bram Welton on Groupama FDJ is quite fast. Nizzolo on Israel Premier Tech. He'll have Brandler, and Jente Berman's not a great lead out there. But yeah, it's Jakobsen's to win, and we'll expect Quickstep to be controlling things, and if he does get dropped, bring him back. But otherwise, Evenepoel's in the lead for GC. Not sure how Movistar will play it. Rodriguez looking good. And I can't wait for this race to continue. I don't expect GC action tomorrow. The stage 3 is the real nasty stage. So I'm expecting a sprint stage tomorrow. Predictions, Benji, you going Jakobsen? I'm going Jakobsen as well.
We're not contrarian today, right?
Actually, last thing on that, Benji, who did Jumbo-Visma go for?
I think Decker is the pure sprinter in that team. But I also want to say that I think a surprise podium by someone like Timothy Dupont is definitely not out of the cards, because last year in Bessèges he also got a pretty good result. I think he won a stage last year at Bessèges or Provence early season. So early season he seems to be pretty all right as well. So perhaps he can also do it here.
Moschetti, Brastenga, new lead-up man for Trek. Christoph Intermarché. If I was them, I'd be trying to put Jakobsen under pressure on those hills if I was Intermarché, if you want Christoph to get a good result. Same probably with Ineos if Viviani's got his climbing legs. But yeah, wedgied up, first race of the season. We're now going to talk about the Saudi Tour and Etoile de Bessèges briefly. This is what we're going to try and do a bit more this season, is cover everything, not necessarily a full podcast episode, but to just cover off various races in case, so you can get your news all from us. We'll start, and also Jumbo-Visma preview dropping tomorrow as well. We haven't forgotten. Saudi Tour Stage 2. Stage 1, by the way, that was won by Caleb Ewan in a sprint, no problem. Today was a 1.6k, 7.5% climb finish. Pretty weak puncher field here, if we're honest. It's not great. Sort of Rui Costa was the main man today in the bookies odds, and he's not been great at his 2015 legs for a while. Baggioli crashed yesterday. He would have been the big 5-star favourite. And Bray got caught. They got to the bottom of the climb. Santiago Buitrago, the young Colombian, rode off the front pretty much in front of Fred Wright. His teammate lost his wheel. No one reacted. Quickstep had Ballerini and Seneschal. They didn't react at all, or they weren't able to, rather, pull for Baggioli, who did start and look good. And Baggioli had to close that after Oss had bridged to Buitrago. Baggioli then pulled Buitrago until the last 400 meters when it leveled off, and then Buitrago just spanked him in the sprint, like surprisingly fast. He was good in Circuito de Getxo, a one-day Basque race last year against Nizzolo on a punchy uphill finish, and Ida Schelling and Aliotti. And yeah, his first pro win, great for Buitrago. What did you think of the stage, Benji? Were you disappointed by Baggioli? I think his level was fine. I just think he underestimated Buitrago a lot.
I think we can't really blame Baggioli's form because of the crash yesterday as well, in that first stage on the gravel section. So even if it isn't the best Baggioli we've seen, we can't really blame him for it. Buitrago quite certainly played it not only strong but clever. Like you mentioned, he kind of abused Baggioli and Oz both. He stayed in the wheel of Oz as long as possible and then dropped him. And then when your boy Baggioli bridged up, he jumped in the wheel of Baggioli and just stayed in the wheel of Baggioli until the sprint starts. And he actually launched with 250 to 300 meters to go. So quite a long sprint uphill drag as well. So this was a strong performance. It took a bit for Baggioli to react on that attack. But honestly, what a ride. And this youngster, 22 years old, we've spoken about him last year during Burgos as well when he came, was it 7 on Laguna Zanaya? Yes. So I'm hyped about it. And I hope that we see a lot more from Santiago Buitrago. I think we might see him for the first time at the Grand Tour at the Volta this year, perhaps. So hopefully that happens. I also want to shine a light on Anton Charmig. He is third on the stage. Last year in the Tour of Turkey, rode pretty strong on the Gogubeli climb. And I was expecting him to do decently on this parkour as well, and he came third. So quite happy to see that. I think the next climbing stage is the fourth one, right? But Caleb Ewan.
Yeah, Poggio Ewan. Well, that's well. By the way, Buitrago, we were outraged he didn't get sent to the Vuelta last year. 100% agree with what Benji just said. I want to see him in bigger races, not riding as a flat domestique in the Dauphiné like last year. The top 10, Buitrago, Baggioli, Charmig. This is a 1.6k, 7.7 climb. Fourth, Van Gils. Fifth, Costa. Sixth on 7 seconds with that group. Caleb Ewan, then Zingel, Oliveira, Silverbat, and Benjamin de Klerk making up the top 10. Zingel quite good, by the way. Sprinty eye for Cofidis. Watch out for him. Were you surprised, Benji, by Ewan? Or, to be honest, I wasn't really. They paced it steady for him, Van Gils and De Boist. And I don't think this is like a Roglic, Pogacar, Alaphilippe level punching performance. I may be wrong. So I think it was fine from Ewan.
I think I agree. We saw them pace it nicely behind. It's also not the biggest competition. This does not declare that Caleb Ewan will be winning a 3,500 plus meter altitude meter World Championships in Wollongong this year, unless it's flat for the last 70 kilometers. But I think this is basically the Ewan that could do well at Sanremo as well. So I definitely sign him up again for that race. And honestly, it's a good performance. I'm happy that we see it, because it's better than some of the other preparation years he had. Valenciana last year, he looked poor in the sprints, so what could he have been on the climbs in that race as well? So it's good to see that he's already decent on the climbs here, and I look forward to seeing him beat the others in the sprint once again in the upcoming stage.
Have we got Hatterdam at UAE? I think we might have Hatterdam, Benji. Oh, no, we don't. I'm lying. So
we don't.
Forget what I said. Hatterdam Ewan is looking pretty good. But that was Saudi Tour. Tomorrow's a sprint. And then stage 4, as Benny said, is got a disgusting climb. It's 3Ks, 11.5%. So Buitrago, the man to beat on GC now, because Baggioli lost 20 minutes in a crash, unfortunately, yesterday. The other race that was on, with stacked World Tour field, Ineos there as well, and Trek, was Etoile de Bessèges, Tour de Garde. flattish stage with heavy crosswinds, 160 Ks, but with a punchy finish that featured last year that I think Laporte beat Buani on. It's got like a
Yep.
10% pinch in it. Benji was covering this one. What's your report?
So basically, throughout the parkour, I tuned in just after the echelons happened, which is a bit unfortunate because I was watching the 70 billion other races that were on today. But we saw a group that included Ghana pacing at the front of the group, in the elite group at the front. And that group had roughly 20 riders to 15 riders. And not only Ghana, but Carapaz, GC leader for that team in that front group. And Bettiol was in that group as well. Mes Pedersen with a teammate, Tom Scoins. And we also had like 4 riders from Arkea with Hofstetter as the fastest man. And also Total with Burgodeau and also Lawless as the fastest man on this stage as well. So we're looking at a potential uphill finish into the Côte de la Tour in Bellegarde, that small climb you just spoke about. And I was looking at those riders and I was like, who's the best puncher here? And in all honesty, we've seen Pedersen do good climbs on this time of terrain in the past. We saw that Lawless had a bad year last year, but 2 years ago, he did well in, how was it, Tour of Britain or something, with similar parcours against Greg van Avermaet. So I was writing him down a tiny bit. I was slightly hoping that Bettiol would do well as well, because we've got a time trial on day 5. Perhaps he could go for GC this way. I wasn't expecting too much from Carapaz, despite knowing that he's solidly strong on uphill finishes, like in, was it Bologna last year, we won a stage. So looking at those riders, and in the second group, we saw that X was pacing just like in the front group, so that was confusing. Double PV exposure, I guess. But I don't know. It's fun to see. Nonetheless, EF was also pacing a bit behind and in the front group, but I think that was strategic to make sure that they were braking a bit while pacing. They were trying to make sure that once they go off the front or go to the front, the tempo goes down a bit. If there's one rider ahead of them, they would stop pacing and make sure that one rider rides off in the distance. So it was kind of fun to see that strategy. And in the end, that front group did indeed make it. We saw Total bridging it up and making sure they had a large tempo onto that Côte de la Tour. But in all honesty, Lawless went off first, and he had a bit of a gap. And then Burgodeau from his own team also looked pretty good. And I was like,
Yeah.
what if you combine those powers and use one as a lead out for the other, then perhaps they do better. But one man was better today. One man striked past them, and it was Mes Pedersen hammering it on the steepest part of the Côte de la Tour, and in the end taking roughly 20 meters by the top of the climb and making sure that he can keep the gap on the latter, flatter part of the climb as well to the line. And Mes Pedersen won here, the Danish masterpiece on the Côte de la Tour, taking the first stage and the leader's jersey.
Rounding up the top 10, Hofstetter second on 1 second with Bosenhagen, Bettiol fourth, looking good for GC for the harder stages to come. Then Burgodeau, Lawless, Ghana, Benjamin Thomas, Greg Van Avermaet, and Schoens rounding out the top 10. Carapaz, February Carapaz ain't Giro Carapaz, 2 different riders. So February preseason Carapaz, just don't worry about it. Ghana probably better climber than him right now. Tomorrow's stage, bit rollier, bit of a longer uphill finish. 1,600 meters at 6.3%. I'd be interested to see how Pedersen probably won't get over it. They've got Greg Van Avermaet, Gerben Thijssen. I don't know. Ineos will probably try their numbers. They do have Ben Tullett, who's quite a punchy guy that they've just brought in from Alpecin Phoenix. Anything else from Etoile de Bessèges, Benji?
Honestly, not that much. We've got Carapaz and Latour in GC taking a bit of seconds there. Like I said, Bettiol at the front taking time. So perhaps, but I think stage 4 is the difficult one for him in GC. Montbouquet is a longer climb. So if he can get enough time in a stage like today and perhaps on the hill tomorrow and so forth on the better climbers, then perhaps he can have enough to keep in that eventual time trial as well. But everything's open, and I think the upcoming stages will still change a lot in GC, so there's not too much to talk about yet.
Ulysses, Covey, Court, Bettiol, George Zimmerman, fair few options for that punchy uphill finish tomorrow. I'll be keen to see how it plays out. Maybe it's a breakaway and I'm completely wrong. But yeah, we'll stay tuned for that. Let us know how you like the format of this podcast, keeping you abreast of all races. I quite like it, and just keeping on top of all the news. Thanks to Zwift, our title sponsor, for their support of the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast. Remember to check out the link down below for our first group ride next Tuesday, and we'll see you with the stage recaps tomorrow. Ciao.